Welcome to the fourth episode of our podcast series in which hot topics, including new initiatives and alternative viewpoints on patient engagement within the life sciences sector, will be covered. Although patient engagement is more and more common nowadays, it is absolutely crucial that it is also meaningful and sustainable. With this podcast series, we would like to contribute to achieving that goal. My name is Roger Lechtenberg and I'm Senior Partner and Co-owner of Admedicum. And today I thought it would be interesting to share with you another set of extracts from a recent LinkedIn Live event that was moderated by my colleague Philip von Galwitz. He's co-founder and managing partner of Admedicum, and he's also a patient advocate for CDKL5 deficiency disorder. He's a parent of a 20-year-old daughter living with that disorder. We welcomed Bojana Mirosavljevic with over 15 years of patient advocate experience, and she shared her personal story which brought her into this role. She lost her daughter Zoya when she was only 9 years old due to Batten disease. She's currently the president and the founder of the Patient Association for Rare Diseases in Children called LIFE, providing support to families in Serbia and the Balkan region. She's also the Director Patient Advocacy Strategy at ICON. At the LinkedIn Live event, they both shared their thoughts on patient advocacy perspectives in gene and cell therapy. So without further ado, let's get to the event itself, with Philip introducing the topic and initiating the discussion around the many expectations and challenges that come with the recent exciting developments in gene and cell therapy for several diseases.
So we are living in very exciting times in general, I guess, and not only positively, of course, but in terms of research and development in gene and cell therapy, I think this is really a very exciting time. Gene therapy in particular is certainly not a new development or a new technology. We've been hearing and reading and working on this for more than 40 years. But recently, we've seen the first products on the market. So in spinal muscular atrophy, for example, in hemophilia, most recently, also and in retinal dystrophy, of course. Hundreds of other gene technologies are in the development in clinical stage already, many of them, and more coming. And of course, there are lots of expectations connected to that. There's also a lot of challenges related to that, but maybe in the media, we may not hear too much about these more differentiated views on gene and cell therapy, but there's a lot about one and done and the cure for very, very severe and serious conditions. And that's where the hope comes from, of course, very often. And so we'd like to start this dialogue here, of course, with a question to you, Bojana. From a patient perspective, what do you think is the most important regarding these new kind of technologies at the moment?
Well, you mentioned hope, and just for the beginning, I would like to, cover that word, because it is a huge word for this context. Of course, the patients and families and caregivers should hope, because without hope they will not survive. So it is important to have hope, but also they should know all other information. So gene therapy offers tremendous hope, especially rare disease where treatments are often unavailable or only provide a short-lived quality of life benefits because they do not target the actual cause of the disease. And with the gene therapy, there is a potential for cure, or at least for some kind of restoration of the function that can lead to significant improvements in quality of life. So that is really important. And we do know that about 80% of the rare diseases are caused by single gene defect. So gene therapy treat diseases that are caused by single gene defects could mean improvements in survival and quality of life for the patient. So rather just treating symptoms, the gene therapy has potential to get right to the core of the disease, and that is really important difference. So the gene therapy modifying a patient's gene to treat the disease. He can this can be achieved on several ways. By turn off a gene that is causing the disease, add a gene that helps the body fight the disease, or replace a gene that is causing the problem. So I got every day that kind of question in my patient organization, because families and parents and caregivers are not clear with that. They just heard gene therapy, but nobody explained them what exactly that means. And patient communities are keen to understand what gene therapy could mean for people living with these genetic condition. And reality and expectation are not always aligned.
So that goes to the point of education, right? And I think also from our experience in many projects, both on the patient side, but also working with the industry and the field, education is really something that is at the very top of the agenda at the moment. The need for education, by the way, not only I think on the patient side, also on the physician side and on the industry side, when it's not only about the technical understanding, but the need for how to explain that, when to seek collaboration, when to seek communication, and that is, of course, not only true for rare diseases, as you given the example. Of course, very often this is extremely relevant in rare diseases, but also in much more common diseases, as we see now. Gene technology is also coming, and also cell therapies, of course, in oncology anyway. But let's give an example like Parkinson, for example, where this is also coming up now. So in much more common diseases. So education as one of the number one things on the agenda at the moment as a need for patient advocacy in gene and cell therapy. What is it that, maybe starting with the patient organization, what is it that patient organizations could or should do from your point of view to really prepare themselves for that kind of communication, own understanding and communication to their community?
Yeah, well, Philip, there are a lot of questions which are unanswered for now, even for physicians, as you said, but especially for patient representatives who are in everyday contact with patients. And, patients ask from them that kind of answers, but some answers we do not have. For example, very often gene therapy is described as a one and done treatment, but it is not true for all cases. Safety consideration really are very important and will be a factor for many people. And whoever considering gene therapy, some parents or caregiver who consider gene therapy for their child, needs really to fully understand all aspects of the treatment, benefits, risk, but also it is very important to be willing to make a commitment to a long-term follow-up. And it is important to remember that the gene therapy only represents a cure for individual receiving the treatment. So for families with a hereditary condition, this means that this condition can be still passed on their children. Also about administration, how the gene therapy is typically administered at the specialist centers with the long-term monitoring undertaken at the local center. And this also very often requires that patient may need to travel significant distance to receive their treatment.
The conversation continued with Philip asking Bojana what the major concerns are from patients and families regarding gene and cell therapy clinical trials in particular, as well as for existing treatments.
So, in regard of the clinical trials in particular, but maybe also already the existing treatments, what is it that you hear most as a concern from patients and families when you talk to them? Can you conclude on a certain pattern? What are the major concerns that are being expressed?
Yeah, well, I must say that there are different questions from the families who actually have some other option than that gene therapy, and totally different question from the families or patients who they don't have other choice. They just have that gene therapy. No other treatment are available. So. For example, some of the questions were, can gene therapy be re-administered if you fail to respond the first time? So that is the main question. Or do I need to stop, for example, enzyme replacement therapy while I'm on gene therapy? And can I continue enzyme replacement therapy after that? So that are the really important question on which, because it is a clinical trial, on some of that question we don't have answer. We will have answer after the clinical trial.
What do you think can be maybe recommended to pharma companies, biotech companies, also hospitals that do run trials in regard of how to prepare for these kind of not only concerns but situations when deciding about enrollment, deciding about participating in a trial, but then also during the clinical trial?
Before they start, they need to elaborate and figure out to be very clear with something about the patient. So what meaningful benefits do patients actually expect from the gene therapy? And what risk are the patients willing to tolerate as a part of the treatment? What preference and priorities the patients have, what is important for them in that treatment, and when they how they will actually decide between different treatments, and an additional consideration is that for many individuals and families and caregivers, integration into patient community is significant, and their condition may be tied into their identity along with their friends and social lives. So there are also that psychological aspects too.
Maybe also as a conclusion from what we see and work on a lot, I would say that working even earlier with patient groups than maybe in other areas is extremely important. Really learn from the patient community what the potential expectations and concerns, hopes are, how can we address that jointly, collectively as a patient community, together with the sponsors of clinical trials at a very early stage, to really find out what needs to be prepared in terms of communication, education, and also collaboration very early on. That's something that may be even more important in this space than in others. And that's my impression.
Yeah.
So
I fully agree. But as I mentioned, very often there are just few centers who are actually capable to give that gene therapies in the world, in the Europe. So the families need to travel a lot, not just patient with one caregivers, but whole families need to travel. And one of the main problems is language barrier. That patients are very afraid to go in the country because they don't have they don't know the language. And yes, the sponsor will give them some translator or person who will translate for them during the visit to the doctors or hospital. But you need to know that they need to function out of that hospital also. They need to have some kind of support out of the hospital too.
So that is certainly a huge challenge also in terms of cross-border access to clinical trials. Very difficult to resolve. Certainly a major challenge, whatever can be improved there within the clinical trial setting, but then of course also beyond that, when the product hits the market, is certainly something that it needs to be addressed at also the political level, that's for sure. Let me move to another very related topic, and that's access in terms of eligibility. So, of course, especially in the fatal diseases, where, especially with children, where families are really hoping for a cure, and then there is this option of a one and done gene therapy that could potentially cure the disease of their child, or at least alleviate the burden of the disease very much. There is first of all this challenge of explaining to people that not every patient may be eligible to that gene therapy. Yeah. And that even if patients are eligible, there's only a very small number of patients that will be accepted for the clinical trial until the product is registered. What can you say about that? How to potentially educate about that? How to maybe also prepare for that? Give more access, earlier access where possible. Just thinking about early access programs or open label prolongations over clinical trial, switching people over from placebo to the Verum. What can you say about that? How could patient groups, but of course especially sponsors, prepare for that kind of discussion?
Well, we are again on that step, early education of every stakeholder in that line. So if you put in front of the parents who hoped, I remember that days, I hoped that I will save my Zoya with some gene therapy trial. I will do anything. I will go on other part of the world. I will collect the money, anything that I need to do just to save her. But sometimes it is not possible. And I would like if in that time somebody prepared me on that possibility that I will not, that my child will not be liable, for example, on that clinical trial. And why exactly? Not for every gene is that gene therapy. And I in these 15 years while I'm in a patient advocacy world, gene therapy is pretty new stuff. We all know that. Well, for patients, but I saw in some cases polarization of the patient community because of the gene therapies. Some one part is, for example, whose child is liable for the trial, and other parents didn't manage to put the child in trial. And on the other case, for example, one part of the patient community is willing to participate in gene therapy trial, other are not willing to participate, and all of them have their own reasons. That it must be their choice that is for one. So nobody should take their decision. And our job is just to give them all information. And what sponsor can do is to have time or to have a right person to explain all that stuff at time, not at one time, because you put that kind of information in front of the parents who want to save child, and it is a shock. So you need to prepare just for possibility. Maybe he managed, maybe that child survived, maybe the gene therapy is good for that child, we don't know. But we need to prepare them for both options. That is important, but slowly, not just in 15 minutes to give them, maybe you will survive or maybe he will not survive. It is not the way. And very often patients are not satisfied how the doctors give them information about some trials. Only 17% of the patient get the information from their doctor about some potential clinical trial for them. That is a really small percent of the doctors and patients who get the information. So where other patients get the information about the gene therapy trials, if just 17 get the information from the doctor, that can be also really problem. And when I ask doctor why, or patients why he didn't give you enough information, he didn't have a time. Doctors, PIs, they just in reality they don't have enough time to answer on all questions which patient can have.
So when we try to put ourselves into the shoes of sponsors, sponsoring pharma, biotech, but certainly also hospitals and research organizations, what can we do to prevent that situation, that a very complex consent information, there's not enough time to really step by step inform and discuss and rediscuss these kind of issues, potential chances, but also risks of this technology for the future. All the issues that may be related to the clinical trial, the long-term follow-up, and so on and so forth. How can we provide for the right setup for this kind of really sufficient information, both for adult people, but maybe also for adolescents? That is a different, very special group that already understands very well, but it needs to be informed very detailed also. So what is it? Do you have an idea already? Did you see a model that can work that we can put out here?
I think the best way for sponsor to contact with patient organization at early stage. That is a really good way. Why? Because the patient organization are great resource of the information, and their patients trust patient organization.
A question was subsequently asked by one of the attendees to the event regarding e-consent.
Do you think, Bojana, that technology like e-consent could support the information of the patient and parents about the cell and gene therapy?
Well, yes, for sure. But again, depends in which country we are. In some country that can have the purpose, very good purpose. But in some other country where they don't know English, if the patient doesn't know English, then e-consent need to be translated on their own English. That is the also option. So anything that can help the patients and to overcome burden that he can have, it is always good to try. Yeah. But I think when we speak with patient, the problem is that long-term follow-up. They don't know. I spoke with one parent that 12 years after his child got the gene therapy, when he get cold or something happened, parents always ask himself, is it because of gene therapy, or it is just it will happen anyway, So that long-term follow-up is also very important. But e-consent, yes, for sure.
Maybe to add to that, also from my point of view, e-consent can certainly help to increase access. Not everywhere, not in every indication for every patient, of course, but for many. I totally agree to that, especially also for adolescents. So an e-consent for adolescents with maybe, young people who may also get different ways of how to explain and show the actual, issues, challenges, concerns, risks, everything related to the clinical trial. That may be also very helpful to have that electronically for these young people, with maybe even with interactive features where they can really click on things and watch videos and stuff like that. So that can be very, very helpful. However, I think what you, Bojana, said before is still absolutely true. Whatever the quality of the consent may be, e-consent or paper-based, what's still required is time for personal interaction and personal discussion and clarification on these kind of maybe false expectations, too high hopes, or also concerns that may be based on misunderstandings or need to be fully understood what the actual risks are. So I think it cannot replace that personal interaction. It's maybe even more important to have that personal time. That's the point.
The conversation then shifted more towards the topic of having access to already marketed products in gene therapies.
And as we all know, in some of the industrial countries, there may be a chance to really get access to that treatment then. even at a very, very high price. But in many other countries, we still have this unresolved challenge that for many people who can't afford to pay the high prices either from private pocket or from any funding that they get, they will not be covered by their insurances. Maybe there's not even a clear reimbursement scheme set up in the country because the country cannot afford that treatment or won't afford that treatment, although it's registered, for example, at the European level already. Not to speak about other countries in the less developed world. So anything that you have been involved with already, Bojana, that you would think can really help with breaking up some of these challenges that we have at the reimbursement and coverage front for gene therapies now and in the future?
Well, yes. For example, I have a great example from Serbia, where actually National Organization for Rare Diseases, so umbrella organization, pushed the changing of some act, law, rule, I don't know anything, something like some documents, because without changing of that documents and that rule, it was impossible to start with the gene therapy at all in Serbia. So it took 1 year even. And, in Europe, every country has their own rules. That is the, problem. And so here in Serbia, in 2022, we managed finally to push the government to change that law. So now they start to approve gene therapy. So that also starts from the patient organization. So they can also be a partner to a sponsor and regulatory body to make that possible. So there are a lot of challenges because of the price, but we can discuss how much costs one human lives. I'm not the right person to discuss because I will give all the money on the world for one life. So if that can save one life, but I'm not the sponsor. I'm not paying. It is obviously we need to be realistic. But the problem is that in every country are different laws and different challenges about that.
I think we are looking forward to maybe up to 30 new treatments over the next couple of years coming to the market. And of course, we will learn a lot more from that. And there is an ever-increasing need for regulatory bodies and also the HTA in Europe, the coverage in the United States and in many, many other countries worldwide to really come up with new payment schemes and coverage schemes. So I'm pretty confident that with more and more treatments available, there will be new solutions. But clearly the role of patient groups and also the collaboration of more stakeholders, including patient groups and patient experts, is not to be underestimated. So another pledge for early collaboration with all of these stakeholders together.
Yeah, because the patient representative of the patient groups are actually member of the regulatory committees in that country. So they are on the right place where government decided if they're going to pay or not. So they can give their impact on that issue.
Yeah, and that's coming up more and more. It's not yet, of course, in every country, but in more countries to come, where this impact can be given to the community, given to the regulatory agencies. I think we can talk about this for days, weeks, and months. A lot still to learn. And Bojana, you and I and others will be at a master course on April 25 and 26. Who is interested to really go into much more detail and have a deep dive into the subject of patient advocacy in gene and cell therapy. Very welcome to join. Still spaces there. at this master course.
At the end of the event, our Medicum colleague Rob Pletica shared another viewpoint for discussion.
So I wanted to jump in with an experience here. I'm part of the Dravet Syndrome Foundation in Spain's scientific and medical board. And last week we had the annual international conference in Madrid. And I learned there that Dravet syndrome, while being a rare disease, is actually the most studied rare form of epilepsy right now. And they're very fortunate to have one gene therapy in clinical trials, 3 or 4 in preclinical, and probably another 5 or 6 behind that coming to preclinical in the next couple of years. And so it was interesting to see that, maybe one day for Dravet syndrome, there's going to be multiple gene therapies on the market that, could be tailored to different patients' specific mutations. But one of the difficult things that I noticed there is that all of these trials have very narrow inclusion criteria where children have to be quite young. And therefore, a lot of parents feel that, their children who may, still be quite young are getting too old and are not having their needs addressed. So when we have, this kind of interest and a rich pipeline, how do we balance that with, trying to also include all of the people, living with a certain syndrome or disease?
Treatment-naive patients, I think that's certainly one of the constellations that has risen some awareness. The other one is that, of course, some of the patients and the families are concerned that after they have the gene therapy applied and it's either not working or not showing effects quickly enough, that they want to either stay or switch back to their previous treatment or participate in another trial. And then they would not be accepted in this next trial because there's no washout period possible. And from a scientific point of view, you want to have sort of clean patients. So that's another challenge that we've heard about a lot, certainly something that sponsors should definitely prepare for in terms of, do they want that? How do they want to communicate it then? And how to handle the whole situation around this, also to not or avoid running into recruitment issues, right? Depending on the situation of treatment availability at the time.
Yeah. Well, I would like to mention the fear of the parents, which you told about. Yeah. So I know epilepsy is a horrible thing to manage every day, Dravet syndrome, and Batten disease also. Epilepsy was 24 hours my everyday, part of my everyday. So sometimes Zoya had more than 200 epileptic seizures. I couldn't stop. But so every changing of the therapy in epilepsy disease is very hard for the parents and for the patients. So when you just want to exclude one epileptic medication and to add another, it is a process. It goes very slow, and it can cause additional seizures, worsening of the disease, progressing disease. So can you imagine what parents can think if he stopped to use, for example, that medication or enzyme replacement therapy? So I don't. This is very hard to ask from them, to stop, because they know what can stop that therapy. So sponsors need to take all that stuff in consideration, because nobody wants to get worse in the disease. No sponsor, no parents, no child, patient. So it is very difficult. And as you said, Philip, on some of that question, we don't have answer yet.
I would like to thank Philip and Bojana, and also Rob, for their time at the LinkedIn Live event recently, and sharing their insights on patient advocacy perspectives in gene and cell therapy. Finally, I would like to also thank our listeners. I hope this 4th episode was informative and inspirational. Please follow us on your favorite podcast platform and stay tuned for the next episode.